Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of GeoPod. I'm your host Dylan Woods, and on this episode we're going to discuss the future of Syria now that the Assad regime has officially collapsed and is now controlled primarily by the HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But obviously there's a lot of other parties and factions still roaming Syria, still active in Syria and still governing certain parts of Syria. So all of that will be discussed in this episode. We will discuss the future of Syria, the possible or potential or eventual formation of a new government, as well as the ongoing military campaigns from the US as well as Israel that are currently going on within or along Syria's borders, as well as the ramifications that the fall of the Assad regime will pose to Russia, Iran, and its proxy network. So let's delve right into it. The Assad regime has fallen. The Syrian civil war appears to be at an end, or at the very least has transformed or transitioned into another sector, into another phase of this conflict, which already lasts ever since 2011, which seemed to have been in some sort of a status quo these past couple of years. But obviously, given the recent surge in fighting, the rebels finally were able to topple the Assad regime, first by conquering the major city of Aleppo, then by conquering home city, the Hama province, and finally being able to conquer Damascus itself, thereby cementing their victory over the regime forces. So now that the Assad regime has fallen and it has been toppled, we must look to the future. A new Syrian government needs to be elected, and a new Syria needs to be forged. However, that can become quite a problem given the precarious nature of Syrian society and the countless of factions currently active within it and currently governing various areas and territories. It's a very similar situation as the one we have seen in Iraq and the one we have seen in Afghanistan in the wake of the Russian invasions, and even the one we've seen in Libya. And unfortunately, on all these three instances, the future didn't look all too bright. And it's a very predicament that Syria finds itself in as of right now. I mean, yes, ATS has succeeded in conquering Damascus, stands as of right now at the forefront of creating this new Syrian government. It is in talks with former members of Assad's government. And as of right now, it appears to be that the HTS will take a leading role in the formation of a new government. However, we have to consider the other elements, the other factions still active within Syria and still fighting for control over their respective provinces. And those parties will eventually seek to gain more influence in the potential Syrian government and might not abide by the new laws, regulations, and policies laid out to them by the HTS. Because we must not forget, HTS is an Islamic rebel group. They were born from Jabhat al-Nusra, a very dangerous branch of Al-Qaeda, rooted in Islamic radicalism. HTS recently has said that they are looking to install more moderate laws and regulations, that they have long since moved away from Al-Qaeda's doctrine and seek moderation rather than radicalism. They do not seek to integrate a firm and oppressive Sharia law. However, as of right now, those are all still words. And previously they have stated their willingness to severely punish members of the regime or those they deem fit for punishment, those who have supported or collaborated with the regime, as well as their intentions to inevitably take their conquest, let's say, over to Jerusalem, which obviously poses a threat to Israel as well, which we will delve in a little bit shortly, a little bit later into this episode. So there's a lot of danger and a lot of perils facing a new Syrian government. First of which is sectarian violence, right? All these different factions with different cultural and religious predispositions going to war and to clash with each other. I mean, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, we've seen it in Libya. So why should Syria be any different? What you also might see in the near future is notable figures from each party dissenting from one party to another, which might create a further rift between these two entities. As of right now, HTS has the most power, especially in the places where it actually matters. The SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, still have the most landmass, I believe, especially in the northeast of Syria. But those provinces are more or less quite rural compared to Aleppo, Homs, and Damascus, which is obviously which were obviously the bastions of Assad's power, let's say. So the SDF is probably gonna draw on the shortest end here, which can be considered a blow to the US, given that they armed and supported, financed and trained primarily the Syrian Democratic Forces, given the fact that they saw HTS as a terrorist organization, which officially it still is designated as such. So what you're most likely going to see is that the HTS is going to try to stay at the forefront, try to consolidate its own power, try to get as much of Assad's former ministers with it as they can, in order to further bolster that authoritarian image, that authenticity that they wish to gain. However, I'm not sure if the SDF and the SNA will be so eager to just bend the knee before the HTS. So what we're most likely going to see initially is a rift between these various factions, and likely some more clashes between them, and eventually the strongest will rise, or a coalition of the strongest will rise, very similar as what we've seen in Afghanistan in the 90s, which obviously heralded the rising of the Taliban. So yeah, nothing is said and done here. I mean, if anything, the civil war has just transitioned into another phase, rather than having reached its conclusion. So I will be keeping my eyes on the current developments. I mean, there are many. I mean, the landscape appears to be shifting every passing hour. So if any major developments occur, I'll be sure to discuss them here on this channel and share them with you, or at least my ideas and theories on them. So that brings us to the allies of Assad, or the former regime, let's say, which are most notably Russia, Iran, and its proxies. So what are the ramifications for those countries now that one of their most major allies within the region has been toppled? Well, let's start off with Russia. Russia still has a military base, the Taurus base, within Syria, which is, as I believe, as of right now, still occupied by Russian troops. Now, I believe currently the status is that HTS has allowed Russian troops to remain within the base, but not exert any form of influence outside of it. Whether that is to last, that remains to be seen. We still have to see what the mid to long-term goals and objectives of HTS will be, and their full vision of a future Syria and how they wish to go about it. And that will probably tell how friendly, let's say, their reception of Russian troops in their country is going to be. As of right now, Russia still maintains the base, but that pretty much all has been said with that. The conclusion that we can arrive at is that Russia will not be able to exert as much influence both within Syria as well as across the Mediterranean than as they have done before during the reign of Assad. If anything, this stands as a huge loss to Russia. They just lost one of their major allies within the Middle East, in a time where their security apparatus is consistently failing, their influence is dwindling, all their resources need to be directed towards Ukraine and their ongoing struggle there, that they're kind of losing ground in any and all these other areas that they were active in, at least up until a couple years ago. So these are very dark times for Russia. Russia most certainly will seek to increase ties with the HTS and other main factions within the future Syrian government in order to maintain some measure of influence there. But HTS in the past have made it quite clear that they will not condone any foreign influence, especially not Russia's, within the future Syria. So as it stands right now, Russia has just lost one of its most strategically important allies within the region, and will most certainly pay the price for it. And the same can be said for Iran. Syria was an absolutely vital component in the axis of resistance, as they like to call it. It stood as one of the main connecting points between Hezbollah and the Ayatollahs in Tehran. Obviously, the Israelis have degraded a lot of these smuggling routes, eliminated a lot of these networks over the course of the past few days and weeks. But still, as long as Assad would have remained in power, these routes could have been easily or more easily have been restored, as opposed to right now. Iran, in many ways, has lost its link through Syria with its most notable proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. So again, Iran has suffered another major blow. Its entire axis of resistance has suffered a major blow, and its proxy network is sure to feel the repercussions of this. Iran is standing at an all-time low. Two of its most powerful proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, have been left degraded to a dramatic extent, I might add. Their smuggling routes, their connection on ground with these organizations has been compromised given the fall of the Assad regime and ongoing Israeli campaigns, as well as ongoing US campaigns, I might add, within the region. So Iran sits in the same boat as Russia. They've lost one of their most strategic partners within the region, and thereby their influence going into the future will significantly wane as a result of that. Iran has been exposed, rather, over the course of these past few months, that it has a hard time supporting and keeping its proxy standing when the proverbial shit hits the fan. It's all well and good in times of peace or relative tension, but when full-scale conflicts are raging on, Iran has shown to be quite limited in its capacity to support, direct and command its proxy network. And those problems will only continue to mount given the fact that they now just lost one of their most strategic partners within the region. And the same can be said for Hezbollah and Hamas, both of which enjoy the support of Assad's regime. It will be even more difficult now for Hezbollah to rearm and resupply and reorganize itself now that they've lost one of their most strategic backers and most important backers. Now, whether or not they will be able to restore some level of communication or allegiance, that is yet to say. HTS is in no way, shape or form a friend of Israel. So it's quite interesting to see which side the new Syrian government, what kind of path the new Syrian government is willing to walk. Will they run back towards the Ayatollahs? Will they make the same mistakes that the Assad regime did? Or will they look at the developments of the past few years and think to themselves, wait a minute, perhaps aligning ourselves with these groups that have continuously failed in their objectives might not be the best way forward if we wish to create a prosperous nation going into the future. But that again comes down to politics. Iran, as of right now, is trying to do everything it can in order to maintain some level of influence within Syria, which is made significantly more difficult given the severity of Israel's campaign ever since the fall of Assad's regime, which we will discuss a little bit more in depth later. So both Russia and Iran find itself in a similar boat, and in my opinion, it doesn't look that they will be able to exert the influence in the region as they did under Assad's regime. Perhaps they can form some allegiances with some local groups or some local factions, but it's going to be a hard and long road for them. And for me, this stands as a shifting of the tides within the Middle East. Iran's influence is dwindling. Israel has, well, I wouldn't say challenged Iran directly, as in regards to, show us your fangs and I'll show you mine and let's see who comes out on top. But it has pretty much looked like that. Hezbollah and Iran both for a very long time have relied on their rhetoric in order to act as their deterrents. And Israel wasn't buying it. And, well, the results speak for itself. Hezbollah has been degraded almost entirely. Iran has been severely limited in its capacity to exert its power beyond its own borders. They have been exposed more or less, and then if you are HTS, if you are the Syrian parties trying to form a new government and trying to forge a new path forward, you might also look at it and say, wait a minute, perhaps these entities are not as valuable partners as we all believed they were. and perhaps it's better to tread a new path going into the future. But again, all that will have to reveal itself as these developments occur. That brings us to the US and the Israeli efforts currently going on within Syria. Obviously, both parties are trying to mitigate security risks and accomplish their own objectives as to regarding their own influence and their own safety on the short, mid, and long term. The US, as of right now, is undertaking an extensive aerial campaign against ISIS, targeting 75 ISIS targets and strongholds in the past few days alone, which sends a testament to the fear that ISIS might rise again now that Syria is in turmoil and might once again try to claim power and take over large portions of the country, similar to what they have done a decade ago. So the US obviously wants to avoid that, and for good reason. The US doesn't want Syria to turn into another Afghanistan or turn into another Iraq or turn into another Libya. And yes, in order to prevent that, or at least prevent that to the furthest extent possible, it is in your best interest to mitigate ISIS and neutralize them to the furthest extent possible. Now, Israel, on the other hand, dreads what a vacuum in Syria may bring about for their own security. They had a pact with Syria regarding the buffer zone on the Golan Heights. And in their eyes, and this is a pact that stems from 1974, just to make it clear. So it's a long-standing pact. And a part of the Golan Heights was always occupied by Israel, especially in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. And the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. But another part of the buffer zone has always been controlled by United Nations personnel. Now, however, it seems that Israel has claimed sole control over the Golan Heights, particularly Mount Hermon, which is incredibly strategically important to them, given the fact that both Hezbollah as well as Iran utilized it for allowing drones to infiltrate Israeli airspace, utilizing Mount Hermon in order to bypass radar systems and early warning systems. So the fact that Israeli forces have now claimed control over Mount Hermon stands as a huge strategic development for them. From Mount Hermon, you pretty much have a 360 vista of the surrounding area, meaning once you install defensive measures and radar systems there, you will have a much better chance of identifying any potential infiltration into your own airspace or into your own territory in a very, very early stage, especially when it comes down to drones and short-term rockets and missiles, short-range rockets and missiles. So what Israel, apart from getting control of the Golan Heights, which they believe stands as a crucial element in securing their own borders, as well as posing a further deterrent towards Hezbollah. Another thing that they seem quite keen on doing right now is demilitarizing Syria to the furthest extent possible. The Assad regime had a huge arsenal of chemical and biological weapons at its disposal, which at one point in time stood as the vastest in the world. Syria, not up until very recently, had the largest stockpile of chemical and biological weapons in the world. So obviously, if you're Israel and you're surrounded by hostile nations and you're surrounded by entities and factions and organizations that wouldn't have your best interests at heart, so to say, you want to prevent those weapons from ending up into the wrong hands at all costs. That you want, it simply cannot occur. It would be disastrous. So what Israel has done over the course of the past few weeks and days is attack these stockpiles, is attack these storages of chemical weapons, these launch sites, as well as any and all remaining strongholds of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, within Syria, as to further dwindle Iran's influence within the country, as well as to degrade any potential military uprising within Syria with the use of these weapons to the furthest extent possible. They don't want to arm any potential party that's currently active within Syria. They don't want them to pose any sort of threat towards the state of Israel going into the future. And at the same time, it stands as quite a deterrent that it tells pretty much the HTS and any potential government party going into the future that, hey, listen, this is what we can do. This is our current position. It's in your best interest to keep the peace with us, maybe even come to the negotiating table rather than wage war against us. So that's what Israel is trying to do. Israel is trying to show its teeth. Israel is trying to secure its own borders to the furthest extent possible and thereby maintain stability in the long run. And there are many, who've criticized Israel of conquering the Golan Heights, stealing the Golan Heights, and perhaps there is something to say for that. But on the other side, it's, well, the regime has fallen. There is no Syrian regime. The Syria that was has ceased to exist. There is a new dawn. There is a new day coming. And Israel, in Israel's eyes, the agreement of 1974 was no longer valid with the fall of the Assad regime, based upon the premise that, well, we don't know what these other factions are going to do. We know the HTS wants to liberate Jerusalem. I mean, it has said so multiple times before. We know that they have affiliations with, or had affiliations with, radical Islamic group in the past. So what is to say that they won't try their hand at us? We already control one part of the Golan Heights. Mount Hermon has been, well, a security disaster for us, given the fact that it was continuously utilized by our adversaries. So yes, we are not going to allow any potential jihadist groups within Syria will eventually take control of the country to utilize those vantage points, those landmarks, let's say, in a similar manner. And there is something to say for that. Now, is it politically smart what Israel is doing? I would probably say no. However, is it militarily smart what they are doing? Absolutely. Their military efficiency continues to I wouldn't say surprise, but intrigue me. They are doing everything right when it comes down to looking towards their security in the mid to long term. And yes, the Golan Heights have been contested territory for a long time. However, they have also posed quite a security risk for Israel. And we have to understand that once you are surrounded by multiple neighbors who have ill intentions towards you, silk gloves are rarely the option available to you. Quite often, it's the iron gauntlet you need to resort to if you wish to look after your own survivability, let's say. So, now, there are rumors that Israeli tanks have moved onto Damascus, or at least came into close vicinity of Damascus beyond the designated Golan Heights buffer zone, let's say. Israel itself denies these claims. It said we don't have the intention of going beyond the buffer zone. Simply what we did is try to secure the buffer zone to the furthest extent possible, and the defensive let's say, those landmarks significant for our defensive posture there. Now, the buffer zone by itself is 100 miles long. It's around 4 to 5 kilometers in width, I believe. I might be wrong there. Please correct me if I am. So it's quite a significant territory, especially for such a small nation as Israel. And obviously, once they're able to fully secure it, it would change their security posture dramatically to the positive, I would say. So that brings us with another subject to discuss, which is, what is the Trump administration going to do in this new Syria? Do they have any strategies in place? And if not, what should those strategies be? Well, Trump has previously stated that in the Middle East, he's primarily interested in countering Iran. He has shown to be reluctant to immerse himself into ongoing civil disputes and struggles, which might not be a bad thing. I mean, Syria has cost the United States quite the amount of resources, finances, and troops ever since the civil war broke out. However, Syria will become a battleground, let's say, for those vying for increasing influence. And if you are the United States of America, you do want to get in there. You do want to make sure that at least your own objectives are secured, that at least your own influence can still be exerted, and that your security posture remains more or less in place. Russia has lost a very strategic ally. If you're the United States, you can take advantage of that by utilizing your influence within Syria. And bolster your ties with the factions there in order to increase your posture within throughout the entire region, now that of your adversaries have dwindled significantly. So if you're Trump, you definitely want to look into Syria. What I believe he's most likely going to do is try to bring these factions together, in particularly the SDF and the HTS, which are two of the most prominent parties within Syria, right? Well, the SDF has long been sponsored and backed by the United States, so it's only fitting that they will be part of any US plans going into the future. But I believe that's what he will do. I think he will soon realize that the SDF can't manage it on his own. Like, they have too little influence within the places that truly matter. Like, you have to contend with the HTS, at least for now, in order to have as much influence within Syria as possible, let's say. So what I believe he will be looking to do is bring the SDF and the HTS together and then form a coalition, perhaps, made up of factions who are more or less friendly or tolerant, let's say, towards US presence within the region and towards US interests within the region. However, when that may become a problem is when we take Israel into the equation. The HTS has, like I said before, quite a strong stance towards Israel and has said quite some things regarding their objectives and their vision of a wider Middle East, let's say. But then again, geopolitics change all the time, as does rhetoric, as does narratives. So it's not unthinkable that HTS will reel in when it comes down to Israel and will seek to compromise for the greater good, let's say, and will be open to joint partnerships with the SDF or with the NSA even, and might become, perhaps, to some degree, a partner to the United States going into the future. So this is all that I want to share with you today. It has been a little bit more of a longer clip than that you're usually, used on this channel. Usually my clips are around 10 minutes short. I believe I'm already at half an hour as of right now. But then again, there was a lot to talk about. There was a lot to discuss. And I just wanted to share some of my theories, some of my predictions, some of my analyses with you. Like I said, this situation such as this change and develop at such a high rate that what is true 1 hour ago might not be true 2 hours from now. So please keep that in mind at the moment which I publish this video. If any major developments occur, like I said before, I'll be sure to discuss them here on this channel. As for now, I thank you very much for listening to this clip. Please leave a like beneath this video and subscribe to my channel. I aim to disseminate more content to you guys in the near future. If you have any questions or comments for me, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, and I'm sure to get back to you as soon as possible. I once again thank you for your time and have a blessed day. Thank you.